This is a film for people, about the city they live in, how the city is changing for the people. In 1707, Daniel Defoe visited Glasgow and found it one of the cleanliest, most beautiful and best built cities in Great Britain. The second city of the empire had run out of space. Its air and river were polluted, its social problems enormous. To change.
Cool. So that was just a little bit of a demo song, I suppose, and a way of kind of giving you a little bit of a walkthrough on some of the ways that we can put together quite a full performance out of just, in this case, just one drum surface, using layering and sort of gestures and so on. So I'm going to kind of dissect that piece and show you kind of how we set that one up. So if we have a little look at the top two screens, you can see that we've set up a piece. It's in E melodic minor, and really the whole piece is just running on these two sequences here. So the first one is that, and then that itself is basically on my I've got, because I ran out of inputs, layers on input 4, I've kind of duplicated our input all the way down here in input 12. So essentially 4 and 12 in this example, both inputs are this drum head over here. So the first layer, if I just for now, I'll just there we go. So ignore the pulsing. The pulsing is kind of just saying that there's another layer involved, but it's this one we're actually on at the minute. So input 4, layer 1. So that is a basic machine that's just rotating through those notes. Then you can see that that one's velocity is 0 to 127, and if I jump across to the next layer, that one basically picks up a velocity of 45. So anything under 45, you can see the adjusted velocity at the bottom, just underneath the velocity column. All these notes I'm playing are all under 45. If I go over 45, that's triggering my next two layers. Both of those are at, well, 45 and 46 actually, but both of them I basically just made a velocity layer by kind of holding them down and hitting a little bit harder than my average. So I was kind of working out 1, 2. So I was just kind of working out my velocity like that, and then kind of doing the same on the next layer. So this example.
It had to change.
This next layer here is the one that's pointed at this note line, and that's triggering my channel 1, which is kind of my bass drum. My bass synth, and that bass synth itself is a riff machine, and the riff machine has actually got 5 intervals working off the root note. And they're just scrolling through in order. So I was using the meta sequence as more or less a full sequence. But the reason I was using the meta sequence is because as we move along to the next patch, I set up a trig. I've set up 2 trigs on my rim, basically as a conduct trig. Sorry, I set 1 trig on 1 machine, should I say. So I set up a conduct trig with patch only. So that's going to advance the patch along. You can see some channels have changed. And then in the machines for the same input for my rim shot, I've got an advanced machine pointed at the layer that is my kind of bass notes. So you can hear that the actual intervals stay the same, but it kind of modulates it up by a few notes. Essentially the first one is, as you can see in the notes sort of highlighted areas in the screen, basically it jumps from F sharp to B and back again. So yeah, so that's kind of the so that gives me nice control of playing softly, lets me just move my first layer, and playing a little bit harder lets me trigger my second layer. Now you can hear there's also a pad in this second patch, and the reason is just because basically we move from, in patch 1, this is blank on layer 3, and in patch 2 channel 3 becomes active in patch 2, and that one is still just on the same track lane, so it's just following whatever's going on, whichever of these 2 notes. So yeah, and then get to the right one. Layer 3, which is the one that comes in when we're in patch 2. Layer 3 is itself a stack machine. So a stack machine, if you remember, is the one that's kind of a rotation of preset chords. So I've picked 3 different sort of inversions to move between. So just well, this one's on random robin, so that's the reason why they're not just moving around in the same circle, is they're on a random selection between those 3 intervals. So if I just play them on the run, it's 1 interval, that's interval 2, that's interval 3. So that just creates like a little bit of, it stops it being quite so static, basically. Just gives us a little pad in the low end. So yeah, so then moving on to patch 3. Patch 3, and remember the advanced machine is now moved the sequence, sort of the underlying interval that the riff machine is working off, back to the original position. So that kind of, so back into position 1 there. So then I've also, on this one, which is my first one down here, basically got a fixed machine that's playing above 59, so I've kind of got, I can have sort of
It had to change.
I'll explain that in a minute. 3 velocity slices. So the first one is sort of the melodic part only. Slightly harder is the bass and the melodic part. And at the hardest you get a bass drum sound. So that's kind of how those 3 parts come together. Then the other thing that we kind of have, oh yeah, just to see that one out, patch 4 introduces that hi-hat. And the hi-hat is again just a velocity slice with slightly less velocity, so it kind of is more sort of in keeping with the general, when you're playing the general melody. So then the other thing, I'm just going to revert us to patch 1. So the other thing that's in there is, you'll notice there was a speech sample, and the speech sample was basically set up as a proxy trig. So in our trigs, and on, where is it? There we go. So on sort of our second input of this, tucked away on the very last proxy trig, I have that set up to, actually I had an extra setup they didn't need, but yeah, it basically, that's there so that
It had to change.
So can you see this light going on here? That's basically a counter, and the counter is getting reset. At the minute, the division of that is in 1/14th, and I just kind of eyeballed that in basically. So if I just kind of show you what I was doing to do that, so I was just kind of playing at the overall tempo of that, and as I was kind of slowing down that division, you can see that that's kind of getting to a point where that's building up during the regular riff. So I was just increasing that until I got to a point where it was nice and tucked away, and it was always resetting before I got to that point where we were building up to the event happening at the end of a sequence of 4. So if I was playing faster, so there was moments in the start of the performance where I was kind of going double speed, when I do that.
This is a film for people, about the city they live in, how the city is changing for the people. In 1707, Daniel Defoe visited Glasgow and found it one of the cleanliest, most beautiful and best-built cities in Great Britain.
So that was just an example of kind of how you could maybe use something like a drum roll only as like the only way. So basically I have to have 4 hits within 1/14th of the overall tempo. And I just found that was like a good way to kind of tuck that out of the way when we're just using one drum, and kind of have it there just as a kind of sort of special spot effect that we can bring in by kind of doing a little drum roll and bringing in that speech sample. Yeah, so that's really it for deconstructing this particular little improvisation. But we'll do a few more, and hopefully that'll kind of show you some examples of how we can kind of bring this all together. But I think for just one playing surface, that's kind of a good example of how we can kind of get a lot of utility out of just what seems like, oh, it's just going to be 2 inputs, but then when we start adding up velocity slices and gestures like the proxy roll kind of trig, it gives us an awful lot of options, and hopefully that's helpful for you. So yeah, thank you very much, and see you again.